Good morning. The council meeting now commences. Members, in view of the severe epidemic, this council meeting is conducted wholly remotely. I wish to remind members that while you are participating in the meeting, you must keep the video on and show your faces. Government Bill, first reading. Arbitration and legal practitioners legislation, outcome-related fee structures for arbitration, Amendment Bill 2022. Second reading, Secretary for Justice. President, I move the second reading of the arbitration and legal practitioners legislation, outcome-related fee structures for arbitration, Amendment Bill 2022, the bill. The bill seeks to amend the Arbitration Ordinance, Cap 609 AO, and the Legal Practitioners Ordinance, LPO, Cap to provide that certain agreements using outcome-related fee structures for arbitration, ORFSA in short, are not prohibited by the common law doctrines of maintenance, champerty, and barratry. The bill also provides for the validity and enforceability of such agreements, as well as the measures and safeguards in relation to such agreements. The proposed amendments are based on the recommendations made in the report on outcome-related fee structures for arbitration, the report published by the Law Reform Commission of Hong Kong, LRC, in December 2021. Lawyers in Hong Kong have been prohibited from entering into outcome-related fee structures, ORFS, for work on contentious proceedings, including arbitration. There are provisions in the AO that expressly prohibits any lawyer from providing arbitration funding to a party in relation to the relevant arbitration. With the proposed law reform, lawyers will be permitted by Hong Kong law to enter into free forms of OXA with clients, including a conditional fee agreement, CFA, a damage-based agreement, DBA, or a hybrid damage-based agreement, hybrid DBA. Under a CFA, the lawyer agrees with the client to be paid a success fee, which is an additional fee to be paid only in the event of a successful outcome for the client in the matter. The success fee is capped at 100% of the benchmark costs. Under a DBA, the lawyer's fee is calculated by reference to the financial benefit that is obtained in respect of the outcome of the claim or proceedings that the agreement agrees to pay to the lawyer. The fee is capped at 50% of the financial benefit obtained by the client. Under a hybrid DBA, the lawyer charges a fee for the legal services rendered, typically at a discounted rate, plus in the event the client obtains a financial benefit in the matter, the DBA payment, which is made and is also kept at 50% of the financial benefit obtained. Parties to arbitration are, on the whole, commercial entities or business people familiar with negotiating commercial terms and related pricing for these services. There is a significant demand for flexible fee arrangements. By now, all major arbitral seats have introduced ORFS arrangements, as clients are generally free to seat their arbitrations anywhere in the world, allowing ORFSA through local legislation would be essential to Hong Kong's status as one of the world's leading arbitral seats. We believe the law reform would be a positive response to client demand for pricing flexibility and at the same time enhance access to justice. That would allow arbitration services in Hong Kong to move with the times, and offer the same arrangements of other jurisdictions, thereby promoting Hong Kong's competitiveness in arbitration. In October 2019, RLC established the outcome-related fee structures for arbitration subcommittee, the subcommittee, to review the current position relating to officer, to consider whether reform is needed to the relevant law and regulatory framework on officer, and to make recommendations for reform. In December 2020, the subcommittee published a consultation paper recommending that the relevant law should be amended to permit lawyers to use officer. After considering views collected during the public consultation period, LLC published the report in December last year. The report recommends that the prohibitions on the use of officers in arbitration by lawyers should be lifted, and amendments should be made to the AO, the LPO, the Hong Kong Solicitors Guide to Professional Conduct, and the Hong Kong Bar Association's Code of Conduct. The report further recommends that the more detailed regulatory framework and particular safeguards in respect of officer should be included in subsidiary legislation. After careful consideration of the report, the government supports the recommendations of officer of the LLC, and that provisions prohibiting the use of officer by lawyers should be repealed, so that users of arbitration in Hong Kong and their lawyers may choose to enter into officer. The proposed law reform is necessary to keep up with the latest practice in international arbitration, enhance Hong Kong's competitiveness as a leading arbitration center in the Asia-Pacific region and beyond, enhance access to justice, and respond to client demand for pricing flexibility. It would further consolidate Hong Kong's status as a leading arbitration hub. The government agrees that the more detailed regulatory framework and particular safeguards in relation to officer should be set out in subsidiary legislation to better safeguard the rights and interests of all officer parties. The safeguards include, but are not limited to, appropriate caps should be set on lawyers' fees obtained under different types of ORFS. Officer must be in writing and signed by the client. The lawyer should inform clients of the right to take independent legal advice. Officer should be subject to a minimum cooling period of 7 days. Officer should state in what circumstances a lawyer's fees and expenses or part of them will be payable, including in circumstances when the officer is terminated, and officer should state whether, and if so, in what circumstances a lawyer or client is entitled to terminate the officer prior to the conclusion of arbitration. The subcommittee conducted an extensive public consultation on officer that lasted 3 months. Responses were received from consumers' interest groups, the business sector, legal professionals, and various stakeholders in the arbitration sector. An overwhelming majority of the respondents to the public consultation were in support of the proposal that officer should be permitted under Hong Kong law. In formulating the final recommendations in the report, LLC has taken into account these public responses. The Advisory Committee on Promotion of Arbitration was consulted on the recommendations in the report in January this year. It fully supports the proposed legislative amendments in relation to officer. The Department of Justice has just briefed the panel on administration of justice and legal services of the Legislative Council on the content of the report and the proposed amendments to the AO and LPO at its meeting on the 28th of March. The panel, representatives of the Law Society of Hong Kong and Hong Kong Bar Association all expressed support for the proposal. After the bill is passed, the government will proceed with the legislative exercise on the subsidiary legislation. as soon as possible, which includes consulting the relevant stakeholders and setting up particular safeguards for users of offshore. Relevant explanations will be provided to the sector. The bill proposes to add a new Part 10B to the AO containing 8 divisions based on the draft provisions in the report. The new Part 10B is intended to come into operation in 2 stages. This is to facilitate the preparatory work for the relevant regulatory framework to be done before the provisions clarifying the legal position come into operation. The new Part 10B are to provide that certain agreements using offshore are not prohibited by common law doctrines of maintenance, champerty, and barratry, and to provide for the validity and enforceability of such agreements. Offshore is limited to arbitration and related court proceedings under the AO. It does not extend to any other Hong Kong court proceedings. The recommendations on offshore also do not apply to personal injuries claims. The bill empowers the Secretary for Justice to appoint an advisory body to make rules and provide for particular safeguards. The bill also amends the LPO to give legal effect to offshores. President, the Department of Justice will review the arbitration and dispute resolution regime in Hong Kong from time to time and ensure that our arbitration service could cater to the needs of the public and keep up with international developments. We believe that if the bill is passed, the status of Hong Kong as an international legal and dispute resolution center in the Asia Pacific will be further consolidated. President, I so speak, and I earnestly ask members to support the bill. Thank you, President. And I propose a question to you that the aforesaid bill be read the second time. In accordance with the rules of procedure, the second reading debate is adjourned and the bill is referred to the House Committee.
Government motion. Proposed resolution under the Road Traffic Ordinance. I wish to remind members that the duration of this debate on the motion, including voting, may not exceed 4 hours. Each member may speak once for up to 5 minutes. Members who wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature of Zoom to indicate. Please watch the timer on the Zoom screen as you speak. When the speaking time is up, I will ask you to stop speaking. Staff, please clear all the raise hand indications. Mr. Chen Xiuhong. All right. If members wish to speak, please use the raise hand feature of Zoom now to so indicate. I will first call upon the Secretary for Transport and Housing to speak and move the motion. I will then call upon members to speak. Secretary for Transport and Housing. President, I move that the resolution under my name as printed on the agenda be passed to extend the effective period of the existing cap on the number of public light buses or PLBs by 5 years until the 20th of June 2027. Our prevailing transport policy is underpinned by public transport services with railways as its backbone. Other modes of public transport play supplementary roles. The role of PLBs is to provide supplementary feeder service as well as to serve areas with relatively lower passenger demand or where the use of high-capacity transport modes is not suitable. The number of PLBs has thus been subject to a cap of 4,350. As of the 25th of March 2022, there are 3,333 green minibuses or GMBs and 1,016 red minibuses RMBs. The aforesaid cap on the number of PLBs at 4,350 has so long been imposed by subsidiary legislation made under Section 23 of the Road Traffic Ordinance. According to the provision, the Chief Executive in Council may, by publication of notice in the Gazette, limit the number of a class of vehicle which may at any time be registered. The ordinance also provides that the Legislative Council may by resolution extend the period for which a limit remains in force. Over the years, LegCo has time and again passed resolutions to extend the effective period of the cap on the number of PLBs. In recent years, the effective period of the cap has normally been extended by 5 years each time, so as to provide a relatively stable operating environment for the PLB trade to face its challenges. The PLB patronage remained generally stable from 2017 to 2019 as an average of about 1.8 million passenger trips per day, accounting for about 14% of the overall public transport market share, which is in line with the supplementary role of PLBs. From 2020 to 2021, the passenger volume of all public transport services, including PLBs, decreased under the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. However, the market share of PLB services still stood at about 14%, indicating that the public demand for such services has remained generally stable. It is anticipated that with the gradual easing of the pandemic situation and the relaxation of social distancing measures, the service demand for PLBs will gradually return to normal. Moreover, in order to cater for the transport demand in new development areas, apart from such planned new railway lines as the Tung Chung Line Extension, Tuen Mun South Extension, and Northern Link, the Transport Department will continue to optimize the routes and services of GMBs, including introducing new GMB routes for bidding by interested operators to effectively perform the feeder function of PLBs. On the other hand, considering that certain PLB services have been affected by the expansion of railway network, TD introduced an extended marking scheme under the Green Minibus Operators Selection Exercise in 2021, under which extra marks will be given to GMB operators that are affected by the new railway development so that they will stand a better chance of operating the new GMB routes. Nevertheless, given that the total patronage of the public transport system is unlikely to change drastically in the foreseeable future, adjusting the total number of PLBs at this stage may upset the balance of the roles and functions of other transport modes and trigger latent conflict and vicious competition among various public transport services. Besides, the public have also changed their commuting habit because of the severe epidemic, so it's not the right time to make adjustment. So we propose to maintain the existing cap on the number of PLBs at 4,350. Meanwhile, the government will continue to render assistance to enhance the service quality and competitiveness of PLBs, such as allowing GMB operators to deploy vehicles based on the operational need of different route packages, including allocating more vehicles to other route packages to meet passengers' needs and to maintain their service standard and competitive edge. The government has also funded the development of a data collection system and has installed global positioning devices on GMBs in the territory so the passengers can access the real-time arrival information of GMB through TD's Hong Kong e-mobility mobile application. At present, the system covers a total of 313 GMB routes. TD expects that about 570 GMB routes will be covered within 2022. In September 2021, TD consulted the PLB trade and other public transport operators on whether the existing PLB cap should remain unchanged. The trade largely agreed with maintaining the present cap on the number of PLBs. The government also issued an information paper to the Electrical Panel on Transport in February 2022. Members had no objection to the proposal. President, in accordance with Section 23(3) of the ordinance, I now move the resolution to extend the effective period of the existing cap on the number of PLBs at 4,350 as imposed by the Road Traffic Public Light Buses Limit on Number Notice 2016 for another 5 years until the 20th of June 2027. I sincerely hope the members will support the motion. Thank you. I now propose the question to you that the Secretary's motion be passed. Mr. Chen Hanpan.
Thank you, President. I speak in support of the resolution. 4,350 public light buses, PLBs. We need to keep this number. Of course, we know that in the past few years, the business environment has been tough for the PLB trade. In particular, in the Public Transport Strategy Study Report published in 2017, it said that the railways would continue to be the backbone of public transport, and PLBs will play a supplementary role. The role remains the same, but the environment has changed substantially, especially so many railway lines have been commissioned. So many PLB operators are facing huge difficulties. And now you can see the aging PLB driver population. That's a sign of the tough business environment. And then PLB drivers are telling us they are earning less and less, so they're not able to provide better service. At best, they could just maintain the existing level of service. For new development areas, there is not much opportunity for PLBs to go into these areas. And then operating costs continue to rise for PLBs. For example, gas or oil prices going up, and also insurance premium is going up. That's why PLB drivers cannot see any rise in their wages. That's why it's impossible to appeal to young people to become PLB drivers. Of course, then there is no condition for improvement to PLB services. And if we want to see improvement, the government has to at least maintain the current number, has to at least maintain the existing balance. And how can that be done? Now, when there's railway development, that may have an impact on PLB business. Well, apart from implementing this extended marking scheme, so PLB could operate in other areas at the same time, you need to make adjustment. Maybe in some areas it's not possible for red minibus operators going there, so it also poses a challenge to them. So maybe the government could improve the designation of restricted areas and so on. And then in some other districts, the government has accepted our proposal to remove certain restricted areas, say in Tongchong and so on. In future, there will be more new towns. For example, the North Metropolis in Yunlong. So with new developments, would you provide more room for development for PLB services? And then on subsidy, you're offering some subsidy, but that's not enough to cope with the increase in operating costs. So I hope the government will do more in that respect. On the whole, PLB services are important to people living in the more remote areas. It is a very important form of transport for such residents. So PLB service would offer more convenience for the commuting public. That's why we need to maintain PLB operations, and we need to give them assistance. Now with the pandemic, things are even tougher for PLB operators who are usually just small businesses. So that's why the government need to give them more assistance so that they could tide over this difficult time. Otherwise, they won't be able to stay in business. They may have to sell the vehicles. They may even go bankrupt. So I hope the government will try to give as much assistance to the PLB operators as possible, so they could, emerge from the epidemic. Now, we know there is a cap of 4,350 PLBs. We don't see any reason for any reduction. But even if the government doesn't reduce the cap, probably there will be fewer PLBs probably because the business is waning. But if we want a PLB to stay on, so in terms of public transport services, the government should try to help PLB so the public will have more commuting choices. Thank you. Mr. Tony Chair. Thank you, President. From information, the cap on registered PLBs is 4,350. It's been the case since 1976, so it's not changed for some 40 years. But then this is one of the major forms of transport. And then the role of PLBs have changed much. And the administration published the Public Transport Strategy Study Report in 2017. It states that heavy rail is the backbone of public transport. Now, for PLBs are used for remote places or where high capacity transport mode is not suitable. So PLB has been playing a supplementary role. Now, the patronage of PLB has been dropping, and there are few people joining as drivers. So there are various problems that need to be resolved. It's not just about keeping the cap on the number of PLBs for another 5 years, then all these problems will go away on their own. Promoting quality is better than keeping the number. Now, about 80% of the PLBs, some 3,300 of the PLBs are green minibuses, GMBs, the rest are red minibuses, RMBs. The market share of RMB of PLBs is 40% of the overall public transport market share. As for RMBs, the quality varies for this service. Very often, RMBs would wait for some 10 minutes or so trying to pick up more passengers. So passengers on board are not able to tell when they could arrive at the destination. And then, RMBs try to pick up passengers. They don't care if they change lanes swiftly, and then they park for a long time, or sometimes they go over the speed limit just so they could finish their round quickly. So there are various problems with the PMB services. The government's policies now is to encourage RMBs to become GMBs. Then we could improve the service standard, and there could be effective monitoring. So it's the case that if all RMBs become GMBs, then the problem would go away. Then there be less flexibility and PLB service without RMBs. So do we want to keep RMBs? There doesn't seem to be a clear policy direction. How do we offer PLB choices to the public at the same time ensuring quality and quantity? These are issues that the government could not shy away from. GMBs provide scheduled services with fixed routes, fare, and with fixed number of vehicles, and there is a service frequency, so there are strict requirements. Government documents points to the fact that the PLB operators are facing higher operating costs and insufficient drivers. And then if there are measures to, with say route truncation, cancellation, or fare adjustment and so on, in order to help, there are these measures proposed to help the GMB operators, but often there is opposition from the district, so it's difficult to proceed with such measures. And then we cannot expect RMB and GMB operators to keep providing a service while losing money. Well, with this industry, without bright future, of course, it's hard to appeal to young people to join the trade. And then the government has no policy to encourage young people to become PLB drivers. So the government is just shying away from the problem is unacceptable. In a government document, it says that it will consider various options to provide quality PLB services. For example, allowing booking service or providing PLBs that could take on wheelchairs. I hope the government would not just keep studying the issue. It's such a difficult time, so we need to bring in new elements to the PLB services so the trade could see a future. Is important. Don't just keep keeping everything the same for 5 years and another 5 years. How many 5 years could PLB survive? No one knows. I hope the government will be proactive in promoting the development of PLBs and enhance their service quality. This will then provide a diversified range of public transport for the public. Thank you. Mr. Frankie Yik. President, the government's proposing to keep the cap of 4,350 PLBs. This motion is moved every 5 years. The Liberal Party has no objection to that. But 5 years ago, I spoke on the same subject and I said then, I hope very much the government would formulate long-term development blueprint for all forms of public transport, including PLBs. Now, Hong Kong is a compact place with dense population. We all agree that we should have railways as the backbone of the public transport system, and so PLB should play a supplementary role. But then there's only, the cake is only so big, and then the railway services keep expanding, and of course then there is less room for survival or other forms of public transport. For example, last year the Tuen Ma line was commissioned, and then many bus routes and PLB routes are affected as a result. The Transport Department said that it's been helping affected bus routes, bus operators and PLB operators to rationalize their routes, but still they always lag behind the development, and so they can't really offer much help. And then whenever there's a new rail line, the government will always rush to just tinker with a minor service rationalization. And that's why there's imbalance in the public transport ecosystem. Now, all other forms of public transport operators are struggling with their business, and RMBs are, of course, the first to be hit. Now, the Transport Department always say that because RMB routes, fares, and so on are not under monitoring or regulation, so they are actually not included in any long-term plan. Now, for example, with the $2 concession fare scheme, RMBs are not included. Now, the RMBs cannot operate in new development area or new highways, so they could only provide service in old districts. But then residents move from old districts to new districts, so the room for business for RMBs is smaller and smaller. Of course, the government has relaxed certain restriction areas measures, but still that's not enough to help the RMB operators. The secretary said there are about 1,000 RMB is in the market, but then about 500 of them are not operating because it's not possible for them to operate. Now, the government's policy is to encourage RMBs to become GMBs. Why don't you speed up this exercise? Especially there are some RMBs who have fixed routes, schedules, and so on. So why don't you first turn these RMBs into GMBs? The government should think out of the box and come up with a long-term development strategy for RMBs so they have enough room for doing their business. And for regulated GMB, well, the operation is not any better because they are scheduled routes. So it doesn't matter if there is enough patronage or not. GMB operators have to provide scheduled services on fixed routes with a fixed frequency. And so GMB's operators also face much financial pressure. Now, you might have read from media report, there are 10 GMB route operators who want to leave the market. And the GMB operators have to apply for the Transport Department for fare adjustment, but then such applications are always stalled, and then also the fare increase is not as expected. And then if these GMB operators are able to submit enough documentary proof for the application, the government should not cut the percentage of their fare increase. Now, for both GMBs and RMBs, they don't have enough drivers, and there's an aging driver population. Now, I mentioned in 2014, for 300 GMBs, the total age is over 200. And now the government said that it's relaxed the qualification requirements for PLB drivers. That is for someone to have a license for, instead of for 3 years, now it's for 1 year. But then if there's need to allow operators to increase fare so they could pay the wages, and that's the only way to address the driver shortage problem. If the government believes that PLB services remain an important aspect of public transport, then apart from keeping under control the number of PLBs, there has to be a long-term development strategy for the PLB sector. So I speak in support of the motion.
Mr. Tan Ka-bill. Thank you, President. With regard to the government's resolution, the FTU on the whole supports it. Because Hong Kong has had the black-clad violence in 2019, and then a few years of epidemic, the overall patronage has dropped in public transport. Of course, according to the paper, PLBs continue to account for about 14% of the total market share, but we all know that the operating environment is very bad, and it all depends on the government's view of PLB's positioning and roles and functions. I have a strategic proposal. We should have a so-called 3 friendlies. We should be friendly to the environment, friendly to the elderly, and friendly to the community. Now, how to be friendly to the environment? Now, we talked about GMBs, green minibuses, but are GMBs really green? Has the government any policy to make them green? 2 years ago, I understand that the government was spending $80 million on a trial scheme. Well, it's just a trial scheme. Is the government committed to make these 4,350 PLBs green modes of transport? Now, without a will, it is difficult for the trade to see any future, and it's hard to urge the PLBs to be a vanguard in environmental protection. Well, why should we do so? This will make their role clearer. Now, for taxis, as we all know, there are night and day shifts. According to many taxi operators, it's difficult to use electrical charging because taxis have to operate around the clock, but I think PLBs are different. You want the redevelopment of Yumen Square as an example. Now, at the basement of Yumen Square, I believe it is the largest PLB interchange in the whole territory. Does the government have the will to provide charging points for PLBs there and subsidize PLB operators to replace their fleet with electrical vehicles? I'm sure there will be sufficient time for PLBs to be charged. GLBs in particular, GMBs, they only travel about 20 kilometers, and they should be in a good position to use electric vehicles. The government has carried out a trial scheme, but we have yet to see any outcome. I hope we can have an environmental friendly PLB fleet. Second, PLBs should be friendly to our senior citizens. We have over 20% of our population over 65 years old. We have extended the $2 transport scheme to those 60 or above. This is a very popular move, and it is also flexible. Will the government ensure that PLBs can be elderly friendly? We should have a timetable for all feeder services to hospitals. We should use a low floor wheelchair accessible PLBs. According to a report by Oriental Daily in June 2021, we've only got 3 such PLBs in Hong Kong. So there was a trial scheme, but then there was no outcome. the government said that it has already done a trial scheme, but only 3 out of 4,000 odd PLBs are low floor wheelchair accessible. Of course, the government may say that instead of 3, we have 5, but still that is only a drop in the ocean. Can we make PLB an elderly friendly mode of transport? Now, the target is for all GMB routes serving hospitals, they should have low floor wheelchair accessible PLBs. The government can subsidize their procurement. We must have this policy first. Second, or thirdly, we should make PLBs community friendly. Now, the roles of GMBs are mainly feeders to large PTIs or railway stations. So we should encourage more frequent use of GMBs by the community. For instance, logistics in this fight against the pandemic and also publicity. The government can use community-friendly PLBs to provide community services. There should be enhanced training. Mr. Tang, your time is up. I'm afraid you have to stop. Mr. Chen Xiuhong. Thank you, President. I speak to support the Secretary for Transport and Housing's resolution to cap the number of PLBs at 4,350 to extend the effective period to the 30th of June 2027. The reason why I support this resolution is because PLBs are mainly to provide supplementary feeder services, in particular to cover places not accessible by franchise buses or railways. Secondly, from the operation perspective of PLBs, the proposal to extend the effective period for 5 years will provide a relatively stable operating environment for PLB trade so that they can plan for their operation. While I support the resolution, that doesn't mean that I have no criticism of the current policy. PLBs are subject to a lot of restrictions, confining their development and operation. Please don't think that by extending the effective period of the cap for another 5 years, the government can then be idle. There must be a full review of the operation of PLBs so that they can play a bigger role. First, the government must review and enhance the role of GMBs with more route packages. There is some overlapping of GMB routes and railways, so the two are competing viciously, affecting the viability of GMBs. Now, on many occasions and for a long time, the GMB trade have expressed the difficulties in operation, as said by Mr. Frankie Yik. In 2016, October, now, with the commissioning of Kwun Tong Whampoa alignment, now GMBs have faced a lot of difficulties. Last year, the Tuen Mun line was fully commissioned, and I think the income of GMBs has fallen by more than half. And we should review the role of RMBs as well. As we all know, RMBs do not run on fixed routes, and drivers can change the routes based on the road environment, and they can take passengers to their destinations in a flexible manner and very expeditiously. They are quite popular. However, starting from 1997, GMBs are not allowed to cover new development areas served by railways and franchise buses, and they're not allowed to run on new expressways. So the market of GMBs has been shrinking. They are subject to high operating costs and impacted by the pandemic. Their situation is even more difficult. So if we extend the effective period of the limit for another 5 years without reviewing the policies on PLBs, then their market share will continue to shrink and there will be less choice for our commuting public. We must be innovative and better position the roles of GMBs so that they can play their part. I urge the administration to look at the innovative practice of other places. Take Beijing as an example. They have a new mode of hiring taxis. For instance, at daylight time and on public holidays, can we allow GMB to respond to higher costs so that there can be more choice for the public? And we must expedite the use of innovation technology on PLBs to enhance the competitiveness. I urge the administration to use a data collection system, and then global positioning devices should be installed on GMBs so that there we can have the real-time arrival information. I hope the whole PLB or GMB fleet can be covered by this information. The commuting sector have been urged to use green vehicles, hybrid or electrical vehicles encouraged, but we've heard a lot about it, but little has happened. So with the full cooperation of THB and the ED, we should promote the use of green PLBs so as to clear up our air. Thank you. Mr. Lam Chan Singh. Thank you, President. I support the resolution which seeks to extend the effective period of the cap of number of PLBs at 4,350 to 2027. Since 1996, the administration has already introduced this cap at 4,350 and has been extended time and again by LegCo. I think this is a recognition for the role played by PLBs, which has maintained a 14% market share in public transport services. This goes to show that we have a steady demand for PLBs. Well, when on a PLB, we have to call out to the driver where to stop, and I think this is also part of our collective memory. According to PTS 2017, we're told that PLBs should only play a supplementary feeder role and to serve areas with relatively lower passenger demand. With the passage of the resolution, I hope the government can continue to support the development of PLB according to the PTS. The government has taken measures to improve their operating environment, including maintaining the statutory cap on the number of PLBs to increase the number of parking spaces, and also parking concessions. But then we have had social incidents and also the pandemic, and PLBs are operating in dire situation. In September 21, the Census and Statistics Department issued information on wages. The average monthly income of the transport trade is $22,305. But for a PLB driver, the average monthly wage is just $12,000, way behind their counterparts in other services. So many PLBs drivers are either retired or semi-retired persons. There is very little new blood. The government should continue to develop to support the PLB trade and the employees. In the long run, the government should consider changing franchise bus routes with lower patronage to GMB routes so that the two modes of public transport will not be competing in a very small niche. The government, the community is in such a stage of development that we should have railway as our backbone, but there are places that cannot be served by railway and they need PLB services. Take the Northern Metropolis and also the new development areas in Lantau. I think we can plan ahead. We should allow GMB routes to serve these areas first so that there can be a steady and stable market for the operation of GMBs. In the long run, we can then improve the pay and remuneration of PLB drivers. Thank you.
Mr. Lee Chan Kern, thank you, President. The government proposes to extend the effective period on the cap of PLBs at 4,350. This is an exercise every 5 years, and I support the motion. What I'd like to bring out is an issue facing PLB operators. First, banks are tightening the lending requirements on PLB operators. Why are they doing that? As many other members have pointed out, we are seeing a continuous expansion of the railway network. As a result, other forms of public transport seeing less and less room for their operation, especially for PLB services. Now, initially, they invested heavily in routes, say, serving rural areas and so on. They plowed in much resources, manpower, and so on. And then they served the role of plying passengers from these remote areas to other parts of the territory. But then when the government developed new town areas, they would remove the PLB routes and bring in buses and other major public transport operators. So these operators didn't have a chance to recoup their cost. And if that's the case, of course, banks as investors would not give the operators any more loans. So PLB operators have no choice but to leave the market. And as market share continues to shrink, then of course the development will be further restricted, and banks will refuse even more loans. As Mr. Frankie Yik pointed out, there are about 500 GMBs being left idle. They won't drive their vehicles. Why? Because they're not able to repay their loans. At the same time, they're not able to hire drivers. Why can't they hire drivers? Because for these struggling PLB operators, they face these issues as mentioned by other members. So there are restricted areas. They're not able to go on a highway, and there are fewer and fewer lighting points for their passengers. So the government always gives a lower priority to PLBs. Now, for example, for the $2 concession scheme and other public transport subsidy scheme, GMBs are left out. So the PLB sector has never been able to enjoy such benefits. PLB operators are not running a charitable foundation. They need to make profit. Only then would there be investors, and also then they could make loans too for them to survive. And now they're not able to hire enough drivers. As many members pointed out, the average age of PLB drivers is over 70. There are PLBs without drivers. That's this current situation. So I have suggestion to the government. I hope the government will have the resolve to reform the PLB services, as other members suggested. Now, for routes that cannot be served by buses, will you give these routes to PLBs? And then the MTRCL could also ask some PLB operators to provide feeder service. And then PLB operators could work with the hospital authority, private clinics, and so on. So PLB could change service mode, and they could they could take patients to their consultation sessions and so on. And also businesses could perhaps hire PLBs for their own functions. And then could the government relax the restrictions on at night, and so PLBs could say go on highways at night. This would allow more room for these PLB operators to survive. And that if the government thinks that PLBs remain an important service for the public, then it should formulate a long-term development strategy for PLBs instead of just keeping a cap on that. So I speak in support of the motion. I now call upon the Secretary for Transport to reply, then the debate will come to a close. Secretary.
Thank you, President. I'm grateful to members who spoke to support the government's motion. As said in my opening remarks, PLBs play a supplementary role in areas with relatively lower passenger demand or where the use of high-capacity transport modes is not suitable. They are an important aspect of our public transport services. We have always attached significance to the development. We've rolled out various measures to enhance their service quality and competitiveness, to enhance and strengthen PLB's roles in public transport. As said by a few members in their speeches, they are concerned about the operating environment of the PLB trade. The government does understand that the trade operates with some challenges, including rising operating costs, shortage of drivers, and also the viability being affected by railway expansion. So the government has launched a number of measures to enhance the viability of GMBs, including reorganization and rationalization of route packages, fare adjustment, reduction of frequency, fleet allocation, and to revise their service schedule to make their services more competitiveness and effective. As regards RMBs, through planning and introduction of new GMBs, the government has been encouraging RMBs to become GMBs. In 2019 to 2021, the TB's GMB operators selection exercise has launched a total of 14 new GMB routes to allow interested operators to bid for them. And in February 2022, the government has also included qualified RMB services into the public transport fare concession scheme for the elderly and eligible persons with disabilities. We believe these measures will have positive impact on the operation of RMBs. The government that understands the operating difficulties faced by the PLB trade because of the epidemic, and to help them cope with difficulties caused by the current economic situation, under Anti-Epidemic Fund 1.0 and 2.0, we have provided various subsidies to the trade. And because of the outbreak of the fifth wave and the associated social distancing measures, the PLB trade has been dealt yet another heavy blow. And therefore, in AEF 6.0, the government has launched relief measures for the PLB trade, and that includes a fuel subsidy of 5 months and to provide a one-off non-accountable subsidy of 30,000 to each registered owner or holder of PLB passenger service license. As I said, and the government attaches a lot of significance to PLB services. Within the PLB, we have set up a PLB unit responsible for implementing various measures associated with PLB, including GMB routes tendering services, and also to monitor the operation of RMB. The unit host regular meetings with RMB and GMB sectors, and to consult the trade on various public transport policies to ensure that the PLB trade can have sustainable operation. Some members mentioned the constraints met by RMBs. To help improve the operating environment, now the trade has suggested the restricted zones for RMBs should be removed. The TD will consider the actual situation of the road sections concerned. We will consider the impact on the overall transport services and pedestrian and motorist safety, and also the impact on road users. We will relax the scope of restriction zones for RMBs. In fact, the Transport Department has already relaxed the restriction on RMBs in using the Kuntong bypass, and also various highway. And we have also relax the restriction zones along Nathan Road and Kwun Tong, and we allow picking up and letting off of passengers at various locations. We'll continue to maintain liaison with the sector. Some members also said that we should allow RMBs to apply technology. In fact, some RMB operators have already introduced new technology to provide seat reservation services for passengers. We welcome that, and we are willing to offer our assistance. With regard to the aging of drivers, GMB operators have been using various measures to attract new blood. They improve the pay and remuneration of drivers and employ part-time drivers to meet the demand at peak hours. The TD and the Labor Department are in close liaison to help the PLB sector to take part in the recruitment fairs to hire full-time and part-time drivers. The government has also relaxed the restriction on application for commercial licenses. At first, a person will have to have 3 years of experience in private vehicle or light goods vehicles. Now we have lowered that to 1 year, and we've also introduced guidelines of working hours to attract new blood. We will keep monitor the situation and help to introduce measures to tackle the shortage of drivers in this sector. As for fare increases of PLBs, I hope you understand that for all fare adjustment of public transport services, we have to take into account the financial position, the qualities of service, and also improvement of service. For PLBs, we have to consider the alignment and also affordability and acceptability on the part of passengers. In approving fare increase application from GMB operators, the TD will, through district officers, collect the views of the community. And in dealing with such applications, the TD will consider various relief measures given under the rounds of AEF and also the acceptability on the part of passengers given the current economic situation. We will improve our fare increase application vetting procedures. Now, if audited reports are given, then we can waive the requirement for submission of documents so as to expedite the processing time of fare increase applications. Some members talked about green or electrical PLBs. We understand that the Environmental Protection Department is now introducing a scheme for the use of electrical buses. Now for PTIs and also various and also TD will give a suggestion to the EPD to see whether fast charging points should be installed. The EPD is going to test 40 or so electrical PLBs. The target is to have the trial starting on in 2023. We will maintain close liaison with the trade to ensure sustainable development of our public transport policies and to ensure that PLBs can continue to play a supplementary role in public transport. We'll continue to review our policy in this regard. Thank you, President. I now put a question to you, that is the Secretary's motion be passed. Would those in favor please raise their hands? Those against, please raise their hands. I think the question is agreed by a majority of the members present. I declare the motion passed. I now adjourn the Council. The Council will resume on Wednesday, the 6th of April, 2022 at 11 a.m.